Good evening, Cubs. Before our story begins, I would like to once again thank the artist who did this wonderful picture for me, Kunststoff. Thank you. I might do different pictures for different themes eventually, but for now I'll continue using this one. Again, thank you, Kunststoff, for the picture. And tonight, dear Cubs, a rather horrifying story, especially for those of you who are deep sleepers. The Premature Burial. Again, bad ground, though. One of the wildest and most horrible tales ever told keep our attention simply because they're true. We listen excitedly to tales such as those about the devastating earthquake in Lisbon, about the plague of London, or about the smothering of 123 prisoners in that dungeon known as the Black Hole of Calcutta. If these stories had been invented by someone, they would be merely disgusting, not interesting. As my brief list above shows, there are many cruel ways that humans can suffer and die. But being buried alive is, beyond question, the most terrible of these tragedies. We have a direct testimony from medical experts and ordinary experience to prove that a vast number of live burials have actually taken place. One occurred recently in Baltimore. The wife of one of the city's most respectable citizens, a well-known lawyer and congressman, was seized by an illness that baffled her doctors. After much suffering, she died, or appeared to have died. Her face was pinched and sunken, her lips had a marble pallor, her eyes were lusterless, and she gave off no body heat. For 3 days the body was preserved unburied, during which time it became stony and rigid. The funeral was sped up because she appeared to be decomposing. The lady was buried in her family vault, but the body was left undisturbed for 3 years. At the end of that time, the vault was opened by some workers for repairs. The husband personally unlocked the door, and what a shock waited for him when it swung open. Some object in white clothing fell rattling into his arms. It was the skeleton of his wife in her burial shroud. A careful investigation discovered that she had been revived within 2 days of her entombment. The struggles within the coffin caused it to fall off its ledge, break open, and allow her to escape. She apparently used a large fragment of the broken coffin to bang on the iron door in order to get someone's attention. While thus occupied, she must have fainted or died of sheer terror, and falling, her shroud became entangled on some of the ironwork inside the tomb. Thus she remained, and as thus she rotted away. In the year 1810, another famous case of living burial happened in France. The heroine of our story is the Mademoiselle Victorine Leforcade, a beautiful, rich young woman from a wealthy family. Among her numerous suitors was Julian Bossuet, a poor journalist from Paris. He was amiable and talented. She seemed to really love him, but she rejected him and instead married Monsieur Renel. a famous banker and diplomat. After the marriage, however, Renaud neglected and abused his wife. After passing several wretched years with him, she died, or at least her condition looked very much like death. She was not buried in the family vault, but in an ordinary grave. Broussette, the journalist, was still in love with her and decided to dig up her body in order to gain a treasured lock of her hair. Sicko. At midnight, he unearthed the coffin, opened it, and was in the act of cutting the hair when his beloved's eyes opened. The lady had been buried alive and was awakened by the touch of her lover. He carried her frantically back to his lodgings and gradually nursed her back to health. Rather than return to her cruel husband, she fled with Broussette to America, and there she married him. 20 years later, the lady and her new husband returned to France. Believing that time had greatly changed their appearance, both assumed they would be unrecognizable. They were mistaken, though, because Monsieur Renaud did recognize her. He had made claim to her as his wife. She resisted that claim. However, a judge agreed with her. In almost every graveyard, there can be found skeletons in strange positions that suggest a struggle rather after burial. It is a fearful sight, and an even more fearful fate. Few terrors are more horrible to think about than being buried alive. It is awful. The unendurable oppression of the lungs, the stifling fumes of damp earth, the clinging of the death garments, the rigid embrace of the narrow coffin, the blackness of an absolute night, and the presence of death all around. What an even greater torment to know that just a few feet above lie grass and fresh air, and friends above that would fly to your help if only they knew your peril. What I now have to tell you is my own actual knowledge of being buried alive. For several years, I had suffered attacks of an unusual disorder that doctors called catalepsy. The causes of this disorder are still mysterious, but its effects on the victim are not. Sometimes the patient lies in a kind of stupor. He is senseless and motionless, but the heartbeat is still noticeable. Some traces of warmth remain, and a slight breath can be detected. This trance can last for weeks, even months. Then suddenly the patient will awaken and soon recover perfect awareness. Many times, though, it is hard to tell the difference between one of these fits and absolute death. The sufferer is often saved from premature burial by friends who know of his condition. Some unlucky souls, however, are known to have ended up in the tomb prematurely. Apart from this disability, my health seemed to be good. Nevertheless, whenever I came out of a trance, I always remained bewildered for many minutes. My mind, especially my memory, was always slow to recover. This caused great physical discomfort, but a great deal of mental suffering. The idea of premature burial continually possessed my brain. It was with great struggle that I even fell asleep at night, for the shuddering to think of that, upon waking, I might find myself in a grave. When I did finally sleep, it always greeted me with a rush of phantoms, bad dreams that taunted me from my own overriding fear. From the countless nightmares I endured, I'll tell you of just one. I dreamt that I was in a cataleptic state when suddenly there was an icy hand upon my forehead, and a patient gibbering voice whispered the word, "Arise!" within my ear. I sat up. The darkness was total. I could not see the figure who had aroused me. I could not remember where or when I had fallen into the trance. While I lay motionless, I tried to collect my thoughts. The cold hand grasped me fiercely by the wrist, shaking it rudely. The gibbering voice once again said, "Arise!" "Who are you?" "I have no name," replied the voice. "I once was alive, but now I am a tortured spirit. I was merciless, and now I am pitiful. How can you sleep so peacefully? I cannot rest, hearing the cry of these great agonies. These sights are more than I can bear. Get up, come with me, while I unfold the graves of the dead." I looked around. The unseen figure had thrown open all the graves of mankind. I could see into the innermost depths. I could tell that very few were resting in peace. With most, there was a feeble struggling, a sad general unrest, and the grim rustling of clothing. "Is it not a pitiful sight?" the voice asked me. Before I could answer, the figure let go of my wrist. The graves all closed with a sudden crash, and from within them arose a tumult of despairing cries. "Oh God, is it not a pitiful sight?" Fantasies such as these kept me tormented my sleep and stayed me while awake. My nerves became thoroughly unstrung, and I fell prey to perpetual horror. I hesitated to leave my house for any reason. I no longer trusted myself out of the immediate presence of those who knew about my condition. Even with them, I doubted their goodwill. I dreaded that, while I was in some trance, they might casually decide that I was dead. I even believed that they would be glad to be rid of me. They tried to reassure me, but in vain. To escape the fate that tormented me, I took elaborate precautions. I had my family vault remodeled so that it could be opened from within. I also had a special coffin made that could be opened from the inside, with the feeblest touch by me. On the roof of the vault, I had put a large bell that I could ring from inside my coffin. That way, I could alert the world to my perilous state. Not even these precautions relieved my fear. One time, I gradually awakened from a fit, feeling a dull uneasiness. No care, no hope, no effort. Oh, like I feel every morning I wake up. Then, after a long time, I felt a ringing in my ears, then a tickling sensation on my limbs. There was a seemingly eternal period in which I struggled to think. I briefly sank into nothingness, but then recovered suddenly. The slight quivering of my eyes led to a sudden shock of terror, the kind that sends blood flowing in torrents from the temples to the heart. I struggled to think, believing that I had a cataleptic fit, and that I was overwhelmed by my chief fear. I couldn't summon the courage to move for several minutes, fearing the worst. I finally opened my eyes. I knew that the fit was over, and that I would soon be able to see. But it was dark, darker than any night. I tried to shriek, but my lips and tongue were dry. No voice came out of my lungs, which felt oppressed by a weight of some huge mountain. I could tell that I lay upon some hard surface in a narrow room. I now violently threw my arms about, and they struck wood surface about 6 inches above me. I could no longer doubt that I was in a coffin at last. Amid this memory, I gained hope, thinking of the precautions I had taken. One by one, however, they failed me. I could feel no bell rope. When I tried to push open the coffin lid, it stuck fast. Now I despaired, for I noticed, for the first time, the strong odor of moist earth. The conclusion was irresistible. I was not inside my family vault. I had somehow fallen into a trance around strangers, and they had mistakenly buried me alive. As this realization found itself on me, I once again struggled to cry aloud. This time I succeeded. A long, wild, continuous shriek echoed through the depths of the earth. "Hello! Hello there!" a gruff voice called out. "What in the world is the matter now?" said another. "Stop that!" said yet another. I was rudely seized and shaken for several minutes by a group of rough-looking individuals. Their efforts helped me regain full possession of my memory. This adventure occurred near Richmond, Virginia. Accompanied by a friend, I had taken a trip down the James River. As night approached, we were overtaken by a storm. Nearby, a small ship carrying garden soil had laid anchor in the stream. Its crew let us take shelter on board. I slept in one of the two ship's berths. On such a small ship, the chamber was very small, only 11 inches tall and wide. I slept soundly, but when I woke up in that strange place, my usual fears took over and clouded my mind. The men I had alarmed with my yelling were the crew of the ship. The load they were carrying caused the earthly smell. The terror that I felt that night was real, though, and it was so extreme that it revolted me. Soon thereafter, I began to change. My soul took on a new tone and temper. I traveled abroad. I exercised vigorously. I learned to relax and breathe the free air of heaven. I thought about subjects other than death. In short, I became a new man and lived a new kind of life. After that memorable night, I dismissed my deathly fears forever, and with them vanished my catalytic disorder. All right, cubs. It is surely well past your bedtime. So why don't you crawl into your beds, cover up, drift off to sleep, and wake up to see your ceiling or your sky, because as someone told me once, it's better to wake up seeing the sky than to wake up pushing daisies. Anyway, my dear cubs, it is time for you to sleep. So I will once again thank Kunstwolf for the artwork. And to all my lovely cubs out there, good night. I hope you have pleasant dreams.